What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to Mets Hot Stove Live right here on the channels and on X. And not even over a half hour ago, there was some breaking news as one starting pitcher is off the board and Dylan Cease in the bottom right corner of your screen. $210 million for 7 years. $30 million a year, and that is worrisome considering if the Mets are trying to go after a big-time starting pitcher. Chris, how you doing, and what do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Way to start this show off with a bang here very early on, especially, on November 26th, no less, for one of the more notable free agent starting pitchers. And the free agent market in terms of starting pitching is not plentiful. I think the other, really big name that you have out there on the free agent market is Framber Valdez. And he's also looking at this deal and just licking his chops. He's like, I'm in for a big payday because I'm going to tell you right now, $210 million for this man, Dylan Cease, with the inconsistencies that he has shown. Yes, he is a really good option, but he is a very inconsistent option. And to give him $210 million if you are the Blue Jays is a risk, but they are going for it all. So this just shows you from a Mets perspective that the Mets are probably better off, and David Stearns is probably thinking the trade market is the way to go.
Yeah, that's probably the best bet, considering the fact that even if you do get a Scooble, it's probably worth giving him that type of money since he's a Cy Young Award winner and a guy who's the top pitcher in baseball. So that went down. So Framber Valdez is now the top guy on the list for free agency, and we know the Mets have a lot of work to do. But while in between our hot stoves, a lot of interesting facts have or reports have coming out with Nimmo being at the top of the availability list, and not too long after that, he gets traded to the Rangers and accepts or basically gives away his no trade clause and just says, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And the Mets get Marcus Semien in the deal, and $5 million also goes to the Texas Rangers as well. Now, my initial reaction was, okay, like, was I excited about Marcus Semien? No. Was I a big fan of Brendan Nimmo? No. Brendan Nimmo was a problem on this team. How many times this year, Chris, last couple of years, but specifically this year, have we done pre-games and post-games? Why is Brendan Nimmo batting fourth? Why is he's in fifth spot? He's in the fourth spot, fifth spot, back and forth. He did not fit this lineup. I don't care about the 20, his most home runs he hit in his career, and 92 RBIs. That is so much of an overblown of a stat line that is just unbearable. Nobody, no Met fan can say to me that they weren't bitching and moaning every time they saw him in the cleanup spot or in the 5 spot. Brandon Nimmo fit this team best with Lindor, with Alonso, and now currently with Soto in the 1 and 2 hole. That was where he fit this team perfectly. He didn't fit this lineup at all. We talked about it so many times. So am I crying? No, it's been 48 hours since the trade. Hopefully Met fans wipe their tears away because it was did this guy is this guy a projected Hall of Famer? No. Is he a Gold Glover? No. Is he a superstar? No. Why are Met fans going crazy? Because he smiles and because he's a nice guy? Nice guys have not won for this team. He has not won nothing for us. He's terrible defensively. He's not an all-star. And this is a guy that is constantly being a problem in this lineup, and everybody can talk about the numbers all you want, but we all watch Brandon Nimmo every single day. Constant complaining from Met fans throughout the season, but yet this is the problem with Met fans. You brought it up many times on X over the last couple of days, especially the last 2 days, going after not really going after people, but basically saying your opinion about why people are going so crazy about Brandon Nimmo, Chris, and it's ridiculous because they got better defensively at second base. This isn't a Semien replacing Nimmo. This is Semien replacing Jeff McNeil. That's what it is at second base. And you have to look at it that way. He's a Gold Glove defender. He's still got speed. Yes, the bat is not great. All understand that. But if you're paying attention, this trade is probably leading to something bigger that we'll talk about in the next topic. But Chris, what were your initial thoughts when you found out this trade happened and the initial reaction?
At first, I really was kind of shocked because we've been talking about the possibility, and I even made a video, I think you did as well, about, the Mets trading Brandon Nimmo to Texas, but for a different infielder in Corey Seager. So I think Mets fans really got it in their minds that Brandon Nimmo was going to not waive his no trade clause. And I think that was the first mistake of Mets fans to assume that. And he
Mhm.
inevitably did. It was a tough decision, as we know now, but he inevitably did. And yeah, I was shocked, and I really thought that initially it was one for one a bad deal for the New York Mets. Because let's be honest, right? Brandon Nimmo is a really good ball player. So is Marcus Simeon, but this wasn't about a one for one deal in terms of talent. It was more so about the bigger deal that was going to happen, and also offloading the contract of Brandon Nimmo. So I'm okay with this deal as long as something else
Yep.
happens afterward. Because one for one, you can argue the Mets get worse with this type of deal. I think that Brandon Nimmo right now
Yep.
offensively is the better candidate. You get a true leader, a good defender in Marcus Simeon. We know that. But one for one in comparison, you can argue, yes, the Mets get worse, but I don't think David Stearns makes this move or even thinks about making this move if they don't have another move lined up to get a replacement for Brandon Nimmo and also offloading Jeff McNeil, like you just mentioned. So I think that at the end of the day, from the perspective of David Stearns, it is commendable. It is maybe even admirable that he is willing to shake up this core. And
Yep.
that's exactly what he did. And he even said that in his press conference the day after. He said something had to change with this core because we could not roll into the 2026 season with more or less the same roster. So I think a lot of Mets fans are, just glued to the players, and they have it in their minds that they love a certain player and they root for maybe the name that's on the back of the jersey instead of the front sometimes. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, we have yet to see what this deal entails in terms of the snowball effect. But
Mhm.
if Mets get better because of Nemo's contract getting off the books and replacing him in left field, and also having that flexibility to go out and get another free agent, then I'm all for it.
Yep.
But yeah, Mets fans, they know Nemo's homegrown. Technically, theoretically, wasn't the problem last season. He wasn't the reason why the Mets missed the playoffs. But I think it's no doubt in anybody's mind objectively watching Brandon Nimmo, especially defensively out there. He is well on his way to being a DH. The defense isn't great with Brandon Nimmo. He had to transition from center field to left field. And now you free up 2 extra years of that back end of the contract because you get Simeon for 3 years versus Nimmo's 5 years. So there's something else in the works, I'm sure of, Rob. I just don't think that some fans can see that larger picture sometimes. And that's okay. That's okay. That's up to the president of baseball operations, David Stearns, to, I guess, finalize and
Yeah.
give the fans that kind of vision. And we'll see if it happens.
Yeah, I've said this many times. I think, and this just goes for Met fans because I'm more closely connected to Met fans. I truly think there's a lot of Met fans out there that would rather keep Alonso and keep Nimmo together and lose because they can say, "Oh, homegrown Met, career Met." I truly believe that they would rather keep them around and lose than either not have them around and maybe have a better team and have a chance to win. Not saying that those guys couldn't do it together, but haven't they been together enough? I mean, how long do you keep a core together? You can't keep the same core together that could constantly chokes and constantly loses. Yes, they're not the end all be all. One guy is doing everything to cause that losing, but they're part of it, right? That whole leadership nonsense out of Vino coming out and really spilling the beans on the Mets clubhouse and what Nimmo possibly was thinking, and he probably spoke to Nimmo, to be honest with you, and probably knew something was brewing in his podcast when he talked about it. The fact that Brandon Nimmo quickly, within less than 48 hours, accepted that trade when he didn't have to, shows you. And this is the guy that some people thought should have been the leader of this team, along with Alonso. Everybody gets mad at Lindor for stepping up and becoming a leader and and having these meetings when the team needed them. Where was Nimmo? Where was Alonso in 2021 when Lindor first got here? When when Lindor probably needed a little pushing him back, coming on a new team. This was Nimmo's and Alonso's team, right? Everybody wants to give them all the praise, but never give them the blame. They had opportunities to take the captaincy or the leadership role right away before anybody was able to take it. And it took Lindor until 2024, 3 years as a New York Met, nearly 4 years as a New York Met, to finally take that leadership role and call a meeting or kind of just step up when nobody else did. Alonso had that opportunity. Nimmo had that opportunity. They never did. They were the ones who complained to the media in 2023. Oh, I don't want them to trade our guys. I think we can win. I think we can win. Well, you're not proving it on the field. Stop whining and do the job. That's what I just don't understand. So you know what, Nimmo, goodbye. Right? I don't want to hear your excuses, your nice attitude after every game saying, "Oh, we're good, we're okay, we're gonna be okay, we're gonna be okay," and you end up being not okay, and everybody's okay with that. Why? We won 83 games last year, guys. Yes, majority was the pitching, but wasn't I getting yelled at during the season, especially early on, that the offense isn't doing the job? Look at the pitching. Well, Nimmo's a part of that. When Nimmo goes cold for 4 months out of the year, and we wonder why we have problems because those guys who are supposed to be part of the core don't do the job. And that's just the way it is. So he can have fun with the Rangers, where they're probably going to trade Corey Seager at some point as well. So who knows what that team's going to look like. But hey, he's in a tax-free state now. He's with his buddy Jacob deGrom, so he should be happy, right? He can build a house on 15,000 acres and shit like that. So he can have fun now. So there you go. So Brandon Nimmo.
My favorite thing was that Brandon Nimmo came out and gave a quote to the media, basically taking a shot at David Stearns as well. And you know what? I don't blame him for doing it. I don't know. He says there's no hard feelings. There could be hard feelings. Who knows? It's really tough, especially, when, the Pobo comes out and asks you, I think on his kid's birthday, no less, if he'd be willing to go ahead and accept this no trade and waive this no trade clause. But he basically came out and said that I forgot what the exact quote was. I quoted it on my X account, but he said that run prevention, some people like to say run prevention. He's clearly talking about David Stearns, who says run prevention basically every other sentence. He said that it starts with the pitching and then also transfers over to the defense. And he's kind of correct there. But I'm like, Mr. Nimmo, you're not playing exquisite defense, and you won't be playing exquisite defense at this point of your contract nonetheless. You were once a really great defender. Yeah, some of the metrics defensively in 2025 that you put up were still good per se, per the advanced metrics, but you are in a decline, and you are well on your way to being a DH. So, yeah, the pitching was very subpar, especially in the second half of the New York Mets, but I just found it interesting that he came out and directly use that word verbatim when we all know that is David Stearns' favorite word to use. So it seems like he was calling out the Mets' lack of pitching in 2025. You know what? So be it. Like you said, he gets to go and join Jacob deGrom over there. And I agree with one of the comments in the chat here saying that this Nimmo trade, I think from David Stearns' perspective, sends a message to the rest of the Mets team saying that I don't care what core was established before I got here. If I don't think that you are going to be part of a winning formula, you are gone. You are gone, and we are going to try to get flexible enough in the roster construction to not only support going out there and making these trades, but also having some of these prospects that were otherwise roadblocked, right, on this team have a real chance at making the starting nine come opening day. And I think that Carson Bench is definitely going to be in line for that. And we will see what happens externally. Jet Williams, now that Marcus Semien is also going to be playing second base, presumably for the next 3 years. Who knows what happens with Jeff McNeil, but that also roadblocks Jet Williams. What happens with him? I think that this is a clear message from David Stearns. And you know what? Like I said, a guy that inherited a team that was in shambles and overachieved in his first season, took a step back in his second season. He's really trying to evaluate from top to bottom who's going to be here and who isn't. And I think that it's very hard to do with some of these large contracts that he has inherited. One of them was Brandon Nimmo. And a lot of Mets fans. I know that the Mets fans that love Brandon Nimmo weren't saying this, but me and you were saying this all the way back before the 2025 season even started last offseason. If there is a way, somehow, some way, because we all thought it was impossible to
Yep.
get rid of Brandon Nimmo's contract, if there is a way to do that, we would be willing to explore that avenue. And David Stearns found a way to do it. And you know what? More power to him. Credit to him.
Yeah, and we actually got a professional ball player. We didn't get prospects back by paying all that money. So it's not like the Mets paid all that money and says, okay, we just want a prospect. I mean, you got a professional ball player that fits a role. And now you have one of the best defensive pairings up the middle. So again, we can't put a grade on this trade because we have to wait until see what happens afterwards. And that's the idea. Like this trade was clearly getting rid of Nimmo's contract and a couple of years left and to try to figure out what they're going to do next. And let's hope this trade leads to our next topic, which is Bellinger, Tucker, Tatis, Quan, Buxton, and there's obviously more that that are out there that maybe we're not even thinking of. But obviously, a lot of people brought up Bellinger because of the fact that obviously Alonso isn't signed yet. Bellinger is kind of a Swiss Army knife. He could play first, he can play center, right, left. He can play everywhere he needs, where the Mets have holes and need him to play. Bellinger seems like the perfect fit and kind of a David Stearns type of guy, right? Really good defensively. Offensively, again, I worry about him offensively a little bit, but I do think that he is the type of guy that kind of figured things out. It took him a while to figure after that shoulder injury he had, finding his way again. He found it pretty well in Chicago, definitely found it with the Yankees. And I think he'll be okay. And do I think he's going to be, a superstar, all-star caliber, MVP caliber like he was with the Dodgers? No. But I think he can really help this team. Am I going to bitch and moan if Bellinger is the sign-in? No, I'm not. I think Bellinger is probably all around a better player, all around. And that's what you have to look at here. There was enough times where the defense really cost this team games as well. And I think Bellinger, he can hit 20 home runs, right? If Simeon hits 15 to 20 home runs and Bellinger hits 15 or say 20 home runs, well, that's 35 home runs. Guess what? You have two guys in your lineup that has 35 home runs. Doesn't that kind of replace and even overachieve the Brandon Nimmo loss? Yes, absolutely. And, I think you have to do more bat-wise, which possibly Alonso or somebody else. But, obviously, I mean, in my opinion, I'm a Tatis guy. I would risk it, to be quite honest with you. If he's available or not, there's still some speculation with that. I think he is on the market. It's just a matter of, what they're willing to do or how they're willing to move him. Is it prospect-wise? Is it taking the full contract? Because there is ownership issues there and financial restraints there with the Padres. But, and, you brought up Quan, and you were talking about it on X multiple times if you don't follow Chris. But, Buxton is another one. If you had to pick one, regardless of the amount of money or prospects you might have to trade, who would you want out of this list?
This is such a diverse list of, potential outfielders that David Stearns can pursue. And I can run through each name and give you a very just, I guess, identifying characteristic that makes them such a good fit for the Mets and David Stearns and his mindset. And it's going to be very interesting to see how David Stearns approaches this list as well, if this is the end-all be-all list for David Stearns to choose from. But you see two free agent candidates versus three trade targets, right? Bellinger, Tucker are the free agent candidates. Tatis, Quan, Buxton are the trade targets. You have, I guess, 1, 2, 3 lefties versus 2 righties on this list. The most inexpensive option on this list is going to be Stephen Kwan, right? When you talk about a payroll hit perspective, especially when he's in his arbitration years. But a lot of people, do not really maybe even understand the full scope of Byron Buxton and that team-friendly contract that he is on, given what he gives you with his bat. He signed a 7-year, $100 million extension with the Minnesota Twins, basically making his AAV for the next couple of seasons $15 million per. Now, I know the primary thing that you will say about Buxton is that he's injured a lot, and that is very well the case when you look at 2018 to 2023. He has played on the higher side of 100 games for the past 2 seasons, although, I mean, I don't know, not much for what it's worth, but he still deals with injuries. I think Buxton is more so of a DH candidate or a corner outfielder rather than plugging him into center field for the New York Mets. I fully expect the center field option platoon for the Mets in 2026 to be Carson Bench and Tyrone Taylor. And Tyrone Taylor also was brought back just recently on the arbitration deal as well for just over $3 million, which is really good news considering that he's going to be hopefully a bench piece for the New York Mets. I think that I agree with you 100%, right? The person that I would prefer versus the person that probably fits the mold of what David Stearns is looking for in terms of upgrading this team. Who I would prioritize of these names is 100% Fernando Tatis Jr. I just have my doubts about one, the Padres trading him first off, but two, because I think AJ Preller came out there and he didn't say that they're not completely trading him, but he kind of put, threw some water on that idea that has been, going around like crazy over on X and all these social media platforms. But I think the player that is the best fit for David Stearns and what he has aligned for the Mets is Cody Bellinger. I think that for a plethora of reasons, he's probably the best all-around player that you can ask for defensively and offensively. Now, if he signs a long-term contract, yes, like you said, there is some inconsistencies, and I would expect some inconsistencies with his offensive numbers. I don't think that he would post what he posted, at Yankee Stadium, but we also said that for Juan Soto. Look how that turned out year one with the Mets. But going back to Fernando Tatis Jr., one, I have a question about if they're going to trade him, period. And two, I have the question if they're going to trade him within the National League. And I think that that could be a separate conversation within itself rather than just trading him to an AL team and having to worry about him should the Padres make the World Series. So, and Kyle Tucker, I actually released a video on Kyle Tucker and Quan on my channel today. So make sure to go check those out if you're listening to the stream on my channel in the description down below. Kyle Tucker, great ball player. The years and the AAV, I mean, Spotrac has him at 10 years, $400+ million. There is some concerns there as well for Kyle Tucker. His bat certainly plays. It really is about how aggressive David Stearns and Steve Cohen are willing to add on to this payroll before the CBA negotiations next season. Because, mind you, we're talking about left field right now predominantly in a corner outfield spot. Yes, Bellinger can play multiple positions. Actually, most of these guys can play multiple positions, but we're talking about predominantly a Brandon Nimmo replacement. But when you have to take into consideration the payroll hit for all of these guys, you still have starting pitching that you haven't even started to address. Edwin Diaz is still on the table for a long-term contract if you're going to bring him back. Same thing with Pete Alonso. That's a lot of money still needing to be accounted for on the books of the payroll. And I just don't think it's feasible for some of these names to come in here, like Kyle Tucker, most notably, for $40 million on a potential free agent deal. Quan is the best value and a true leadoff guy that can provide a really good, different look for you in the top two with Lindor and Quan. But, with Tatis, it's an ascending contract given where he is at in his career, being 27 years old and the contract running through age 35. We're not talking about age 37, 38, 39 like some of these guys. We're talking about only age 35. You get the prime years of Fernando Tatis Jr. That'd be a no-brainer if he's on the market. But I think the most realistic possibility here is Bellinger, given that he's a free agent and you wouldn't have to deal the prospects for him. Or, like I said, I like Stephen Kwan. I know that there's some concerns with his bat because the numbers offensively did drop off in 2025 for him in comparison to 2024. But I think that a strict fit defensively and offensively, him being that true leadoff bat, the same reason why people like Luis Ariz is the same reason why people like Stephen Kwan. I think he certainly would play, and the cap hit, or the payroll hit, I should say, wouldn't be as large, estimated around $8.5 million. It's all about what the Guardians would want in terms of prospect capital back in return. So, there's a case to be made for each one of these five names. It's all about how when Steve Cohen and David Stearns come together, how aggressive they're going to willing to be in adding to the payroll before the 2027 CBA negotiations.
Yeah, and look, all of these guys have concerns and question marks. The difference with Tatis, Quan, Buxton, you probably have to give up some prospects, and that's worrisome. It depending on what the Mets do, right? If the Mets try to, that's why David Stearns has a, a hard offseason to work, because with the starting pitching and the outfield now that he needs, you have to decide what you're using these prospects for. Is it going to be for a Tariq Skubal or Sandy Alcantara, or one of the big name starting pitchers out there, or one of the outfielders that we just talked about, Tatis, Kwan, and Buxton? Obviously, Tatis will most likely bring back the biggest return. But again, Bellinger is a question mark for sure. We know his defense is that good, but we've seen him be a shell of himself as an MVP, and he looked like he did find himself, but you just never know. But again, the Mets need an outfielder. Like you can't. I'm sorry, I can't roll out there. Carson Bench right now. I can't roll out there Jet Williams right now. I'm not starting the season with unknown prospects in the outfield. I just can't do that, especially with Juan Soto out there. I just can't do that. You have to have a good plan with one of these guys. One of these guys have to be a New York Met. And I know Luis Robert is not on that list. I know that's another possibility. I'm not sure the Mets would want to trade him. And I think his contract's around 20. I think he has like that club option that's around 20 something $million, if I'm not mistaken. So that is concerning as well. Like that is a huge risk, right? We know Luis Robert is a great defender in center field, but if that bat doesn't play, you're in for a rude awakening here. So look, all these guys are question marks. Everybody can fit in some way or another. I think Tucker's probably the farthest from being a Met because of the $400 million that he's projected to get. I don't think the Mets are going to go there. I really don't think so. I think Tatis is more likely than Tucker. I know, even though Tatis is a long shot, but I think Tatis is more of a possibility than Tucker. So again, would I be okay? Like, Buxton scares me a lot too because of his injuries. Like, he's great when he plays, but he rarely plays. And that's concerning, especially when you need that bat in the lineup, especially when you need that defense in center field. If he's not playing, now you're already digging into your bench, and now Tyrone Taylor is your center fielder who really can't hit. And now your depth in your bench gets worse. And that's where you have to worry about as well. Overall, when it comes to the issues that I clearly saw the Mets have last year, I always talked about roster construction, lineup construction. I thought the roster construction was terrible. You shouldn't have, 40 infielders and a couple of prospects that basically play the same position. It never made sense. Why they didn't trade some of these guys at the deadline is beyond me. But the Mets can't have this situation happen again. I'm not saying trade all of them, but you have to trade some, especially with Semien coming aboard now. That is another infield to the mix. We know Semien is a second baseman. We know Lindor is a shortstop. Right now, it's Vientos and Beatty fighting out for third base. That might change depending on trades. And at first base is a hole right now because Alonso is not signed. There's a lot of options for the Mets here. They can go to free agent round and just spend money. If you're so desperate about keeping these prospects that you never, seem to either work out or play, then you got to trade some of these guys. And the Mets are in a big spot here, right? I do like that we seen David Stearns right off the bat this offseason get a little uncomfortable, because make no mistake about it, that Nimmo for Semien trade, that's an uncomfortable situation to be in. Remember, I said during the trade deadline, we need to see David Stearns get uncomfortable a little bit. And I think this was uncomfortable because this wasn't probably a favorable move for Met fans, for a lot of us. For a lot of Met fans, if I did a poll, most people didn't like the trade. Now, for whatever reason they didn't like the trade. And that's okay. That's your opinion. And I think too many people are looking at it, Nimmo for Semien, and that's the way people are looking at it, but they're not looking at the overall picture here. But again, they have a gripe because we don't know the offseason yet. If the Mets don't do what they're supposed to do and his trade looks bad at the end, at the end of the offseason, we can go back and argue that opinion as well. So, I'm okay with Bellinger, to be quite honest with you. I just think that he fits the Mets perfectly. Along with, I would say Bellinger, Tatis, and Kwan are probably the three best options for the Mets. I think they need to land one of them. If you get one of them, I think we'll be fine. Even if Bellinger takes a step back, offensively, he could still hit 20 home runs. He could still, bat in the high 260s, 270s, and he could probably knock you in 80, 85 RBIs. I think we're going to be okay with that. And I think that he's just more. I think he is more of a big time clutch guy. I truly believe that. We saw him with the Dodgers, and you saw him with the Yankees this year. He got a lot of big hits for them. So we will see what happens with those guys, and it's going to be very interesting. With the Cease deal that just happened. And if you don't know what happened, guys, we just talked about it. Dylan Cease to the Blue Jays, 7 years, 210 mil, $30 million a year. So he is off the board, which is insane. Again, the Blue Jays were trying to spend money for years. They were trying to give money away for the last couple of seasons. So this is probably, they just spit on that money. But again, that's a good, this is why when you make the World Series and you lose at the end, this is a sign you got to make to get better. You see, Chris, this is what annoys me about the New York Mets. How many times have we said it? I said it many times. When you get to the game 6 of the NLCS, you got to make yourself better. And the Mets didn't do that last offseason. They got worse, especially in the rotation. The Blue Jays, who actually pitched somewhat well in the postseason, their offense was really good. But you know what? They saw what happened at the end of that World Series. Their pitching kind of coughed it up. And what did you do? You signed one of the bigger offseason free agents starting pitchers. That's what the Mets need to do. And again, I'm not saying overpay, even though, let's be honest, everybody's probably going to be overpaid here, regardless of who you're going to bring in. But that's, when I saw that, I'm like, the Blue Jays are going for it. You know what? They won the division. They got to the World Series. You know what they got to do? They got to stay ahead of the Yankees, and that's what they're trying to do. The Mets got to start to have that same mentality, because at some point you got to look at it and say, you know what? We got to pass the Phillies here. We got to beat the Dodgers. Like, you have to think that way. You can't just say, oh, I think we're good enough, because you might not be. And sometimes you might have to get uncomfortable with a contract like that, not just a trade, but with a contract like that, Chris.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that the way to do it this offseason with the way that the Mets are structured is through trade, because there are just a handful of free agents on the market that are going to present themselves in a favorable manner in terms of the actual value that David Stearns is truly going to push for. So, as we have already seen with the Brandon Nimmo trade, I think that there's, more trades to come for the New York Mets to not only replace Brandon Nimmo if they're going to go the external route there, but also add on to your starting pitching, especially. And there have been early reports out there. I'm not sure if you want to just go into Diaz or just go over into like the starting pitching, but I think that the early reports suggest that the Mets are really going to be after not one, but two frontline starters. And I think that the most realistic free agent possibility that we've talked about in the previous hot stove is Tetsuya Imai, but all of these trade candidates on the screen are definitely in play for the New York Mets as well, plus probably a couple of others that we haven't mentioned as of yet. So the trade market for another bat, and also a pitcher is probably the way to go, outside of maybe looking to bring back an Edwin Diaz or Pete Alonso. So I'd expect a trade-heavy offseason for not only the New York Mets, but a lot of these teams probably thinking the same thing here if they don't want to dish out the contracts to, let's just say, a Cody Bellinger or a Kyle Tucker for $400+ million. I think there's going to be a lot of trades more so early on this offseason outside of this egregious Dylan Cease deal, because I'm happy for the Blue Jays. Good for them. Like you said, they did what they needed to do after coming off of a World Series appearance to stay ahead of the Yankees in the competition immediately. But let's be honest. That's an overpay. 7 years, $210 million, $30 million a year. Cease isn't worth that. But that's what it took to get him in the doors. And like I said, the other free agent pitchers, especially Framber Valdez, they're just licking their chops right now and saying, we are in for a really good payday.
Yeah, hey, listen, you can never be a fan. I know Jays fans, some of them don't like that deal. Understandable. But you know what? The team wanted that guy, and they got their guy. Just like the Mets wanted Juan Soto, and they weren't going to let him get away. Like, that's what you got to do sometimes. The guy that you want, you go get. Yeah, it might suck in year 5, 6, or 7 of that deal. But you know what? If he helps you win a championship with in the first 3 to 4 years of that contract, it's worth it. Same thing like CC Sabathia with the Yankees. That was a terrible contract, but you know what? They got their World Series out of it, and at the end, it was a terrible contract. So that's just the way it goes. Like you have to look at it short term, even though these long term deals. You want to look at it in okay, especially with pitchers. The first half of that deal is where you want to win with them, because obviously after that it's going to be a problem. So we'll see. I don't think the Cease deal would affect Diaz contract at all. I mean, I don't think it hurts, but when it comes to Diaz, we have an idea where the Mets want to go with Edwin Diaz when it comes to contract wise. They probably prefer three. They might be willing to go four, but I don't think they're willing to go number five. And there's a team out there that says they're going to look for high leverage relievers, and that's the Los Angeles Dodgers. And when you hear that team name, you're like, they'll do it because they will. It's just a matter of, I think the Dodgers are going to come with the best offer, and I think Diaz is going to come back to the Mets and say, listen, if you don't match it, I'm going to LA. And that's where I'm worried, because as we both agreed on and we talked about early, what was priority number one for the New York Mets? It was Edwin Diaz. Nothing. It was one, and then to me, starting pitching is 1A, top starter. You can't let Diaz go here. Robert Suarez is a really good closer, but can he pitch in New York? Can he pitch in high leverage situations in New York? I don't know. We know Diaz can. I think it's worth giving him that extra fifth year if need be. And I don't think the Mets can play and let the market develop here, because that's where you fall into a problem, Chris. So, 3 years is not going to definitely do it for sure. Will the Mets go 4 years? I don't know. I hope so, but they better go five if there's no other choice, because you can't lose them.
I mean, you have to definitely start at 4 years. If
Sure.
there is a team that is willing to go five, I mean, you have to match it. Like we said, there's no backtracking on this. And that Edwin Diaz, we're talking about this core. I mean, Edwin Diaz is the exception of you need to bring this guy back because of the lack of available options to replace him, right? And so it would just be a really bad look and a really bad selling point. Like, I'm on board with the Brandon Nimmo trade, but I'm not on board with letting this guy go because he's wanting a fifth year. If a team is willing to do that, you go ahead and match that offer. 4 for 100. That if that's what it takes to get it done, to $20 million straight up, per year. Or sorry, four for 80, right? 4 for 80 or 90. You start there, $20 million per year. And then if you need to go five for the 100, okay, think about doing that as well. I just don't think that, like you said, there's no. This is where, like, David Stearns usually has plan B, plan C ready in place. There is really no viable plan B, plan C here. I mean, yeah, sure, I'd take Robert Suarez as a plan B if it really came down to when the Mets really did not want to give into the demands of Edwin Diaz. But at the end of the day, I'm still taking Edwin Diaz all day long. The early reports are suggesting that he wants the same contract as before, 5 for 102. For a player of Diaz's caliber, that's not really egregious. And like I said, if Steve Cohen is really as pissed off as he says he is, you have to understand the value of what Diaz brings to your bullpen. A bullpen that is going to look a lot different, right? Especially in the back end for the guys that are leading up to Edwin Diaz. You need a consistent closer and a guy that can lock down ball games. And this is just not a player that you can cheap out on, unfortunately, right? And you just can't do that if you're David Stearns. So I do think that the Mets are going to prioritize 4 years. Like I said, for 80 to 90, call it anywhere just a little bit above, 20, maybe even 20 on the dot AAV. If you need to go to that fifth year, you just can't afford to lose him, Rob. We've been saying it for the past couple of weeks, right? Ever since we started these off-season hot stoves, he is priority number one. It's like that SpongeBob reference. He was number one. For those of y'all who watch SpongeBob, but
Yeah.
was it like Schmitty Werben Man Jensen or something? Listen, I'm sort of aging myself, I guess, here. But in all seriousness, Edwin Diaz needs to be a New York Met. And Pete Alonso aside, Brandon Nimmo, who's now not a New York Met aside, Jeff McNeil aside in those trade talks, Diaz is the glue to your bullpen. A bullpen that still has the possibility of being really good, even given the high turnover, right? You retained AJ Minter on the player option, Brooks Raley on the team option. Um, Dylan Ross is going to be there. I think Christian Scott is in play. Depending on what the Mets do with their rotation, Christian Scott coming back in 2026, a way to work him back into potentially just getting on the mound is by having him throw some bullpen innings, some non-stressful bullpen innings, but bullpen innings nonetheless. You have a opportunity to build a really competent bullpen even still, given some of the names that you are losing from 2025. And yeah, I just don't know. Like, there's no loyalty. There's not going to be any loyalty with Diaz to the Mets here. This is a tough business, as we just mentioned, with the whole Brandon Nimmo situation. Discounts are discounts. There's not going to be a hometown discount. I still think the Blue Jays, even given this Dylan Cease deal, they're still looking for another high-end reliever that they can plug into their closer role instead of Hoffman being that eighth inning guy. I still think they'll go $100+ million. Given what you just said about them going all in and staying ahead of the competition, Rob, I'm actually more scared of the Blue Jays being really aggressive and starting off this offseason on the right foot with Dylan Cease and going out there and making a push for Edwin Diaz than I'm scared of the Dodgers swooping in to get Edwin Diaz. So it's just the market. There's a lack of options. You know, you could talk about Devin Williams all we want. If there's an opportunity to get both, you do that. But if there's not, you're not taking Devin Williams over Edwin Diaz. I'm sorry, it's just not. This is not a
Yeah,
possibility. It's not even
yeah,
a realistic talking point. So yeah, I don't know. My question for you is that what do you think in terms of AAV? Right? Do you like does 4 for, let's say, 85 get it done? Or do you think a team is actually going to go out there and give him that record-setting deal that he got
yeah.
before, 5 for 102?
I think I mean, look at the Blue Jays overpaying for Cease. Why wouldn't they do it? If they're willing to give Cease 7 years, 210 for $30 million a year, why wouldn't they give $21 million per year to one of the top closers in baseball, at least for the next couple of years? And I think the Dodgers showed you they just signed Turner Scott, and they're talking about high leverage relievers. Like, I mean, they gave him outrageous amount of money that we were shocked that he got that much. Why? Look, put it this way: if the Mets don't land Edwin Diaz, I'm gonna be. I don't care what else they do, because you know what? You better be right on Devin Williams, or you better be right on Robert Suarez. Because if you're not, and those guys suck, you ain't winning a lot of games next year unless your offense goes to a next level that we thought they would this year. They need to be amazing, and you better have a better rotation, because you can't have a subpar closer and hopefully a decent bullpen, and your rotation shit again. So it can't be either or. You can't have an elite closer and your starting pitching sucks because you can never get to your closer, and you can't have the other way around. You can't have really good starting pitching and then the back end of your bullpen is a disaster and you're losing games in the eighth and ninth again. You just can't do that. So the Mets better do it. Listen, if you're gonna trade Nimmo and save 3 years on that contract and save a little bit of money overall, give it to Diaz. Give it to Diaz. This should not be prolonged. This should have been an opportunity. I'm not saying that you go off with your best offer right off the bat. I'm not saying you do that, right? You got to negotiate a little bit, because if you throw him a 4-year deal and he takes it, great, you win. You don't have to give him that 5th year. But you know what? You better start with that 4th year, because I don't want to hear this bullshit. You're offering him 3 years, and it's kind of a hard cap on the 3 years, and maybe you'll go 4, because you know what? Diaz will be wearing another jersey, and that's concerning. And we can't have that. We just can't have that, right? You can't win 83 games and, again, half-ass another offseason, and then everybody's going to say, well, we got the deadline. Great. Do you know what David Stearns had done at the deadline? Absolutely nothing. So I don't want to hear about the deadline. Your offseason, you should fill as many holes as possible with the best available in every position. I'm not saying get the top guy at every position, but you know what? You should get at least the top 3. There should be no reason. You are in New York. You're a New York market. I'm sick and tired of getting, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th guy and say, oh, well, this guy was good 7 years ago. Like, I just don't want to hear it. Like, Diaz is the best guy. He was on your team. He can pitch in New York. He's a fan favorite. Not that I care about that part. I don't care about the fan favorite part of it. But he's a damn good closer, and he was your guy, and still one of the best in baseball. You don't mess around with that. You just don't. And if you do, you better be right with the guy you replace him with, because if you're not, you know what? You think Mendoza's on the hot seat this year? Stearns, you'll be on the hot seat come trade deadline and next offseason. And lucky for him, there's a CBA possibility where he might get lucky and keep his job because might not be no baseball. So overall, get the job done. No more excuses. You got the money, you got the prospect potential and players on your roster to make trades to get anybody you want. And with Diaz, it's just money. Money came off the books. Let's go. Get it done. And I think that's what he needs to do with Diaz. And I think he knows that. Or at least I hope he does. Because if he doesn't, well, he's just looking for trouble. Yes, he really is.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, Edwin Diaz is not arguably, especially with what's going on with Class A right now, he is the best closer in baseball, and he deserves to get paid like it. So there's just certain things that you can afford to. There's certain guys that you can afford to part ways with. There's certain aspects of a roster that you can afford to play around with and see what works, versus what doesn't. I don't think the back end of your bullpen, especially with the offense, doing what it's supposed to do to give the team a lead, and the starting pitching that you should be building up to maintain that lead, there's something that you don't mess with, and it's a guy that can lock a baseball game down for you on any given night consistently, and that's Edwin Diaz. So I agree. If I had to guess, I've said it all along, and I agree with you, right? When has David Stearns shown us in his career, and I hope that this changes if it comes down to it, when has he shown that he is going to give that dollar value to any reliever, let alone what their name says on the back? Never. We've never seen it from him.
Nope.
Right? We've never seen it from him. Do we expect that to change? I hope he has the situational awareness to understand the gravity of the situation, given the need of Edwin Diaz. Am I confident in it if some team like the Dodgers or the Blue Jays swoop in? That's a different question. And as those rumors heat up, I'll get back to you with my updated answer. But I could, I don't want to scare fans. I could see him walking though. I can see him walking as much as it pains me to say. So we'll see what happens. This is a very big thing that we should be keeping an eye out on, and all the rumors and updates that are coming out from the reporters. Edwin Diaz's name to watch for sure.
Yeah, Stearns better not fuck it up. Like I don't trust him as it is. I think he's he's a used car salesman. I think he says what he wants to say, and he'll make you believe, just like he did with the trade deadline, when 30 minutes after the trade deadline, he had a press conference, which no other GM did around baseball, but he had to make sure he told everybody that, oh, well, we got our pitching prospects. Oh, we got these guys, just to make Mets fans feel a little bit better, because he failed the trade deadline and it ultimately bit the Mets in the ass. So, he better figure it out. Like I says, you got to adjust your plans when your plans of the 2025 season, all the additions that you made basically, went up in flames because it was so bad. You got to adjust your plan. I'm not saying 100%, but you know what? You got to adjust enough to know that you just can't, go bargain basement on all these guys and think it's all going to work out, because you need a lot to go right for that to happen. So the other guy that we're talking about, and yes, it's going to cost money as well, is Pete Alonso, my favorite Met, because of the fact that the Nimmo, I truly think now, and this is not me being, on the Pete Alonso side or not the Pete Alonso side of re-signing him, I think the Nimmo trade makes it very likely now for Pete Alonso to come back. I don't believe David Stearns is that stupid to allow your both homegrown talents, career Mets, both leave the same offseason. One in a trade and one signing somewhere else. I know David Stearns doesn't really care about the emotional attachment, but again, he better be right if he does not re-sign Pete Alonso. Like, truly, like, this is a dangerous game to play. If you can get rid of two career Mets in one offseason, I mean, you better fucking win the World Series. I'm telling you right now, because the Met fans will never forgive you And I'm not one of these guys that care about, like Chris said, the back of the jersey. I care about the front. If another player makes us win, I don't care. I don't need career Mets. I don't need accolades about that. I don't need the guy to, have his number retired, at City Field. I don't care about that. I want World Series banners. I never saw one in my lifetime. I was born the year after they won. All right, it's going on 40 years. Like, it's about time. I don't care who is on this team. If they're gonna help us win, I'm on board. So is it likely that Pete Alonso is going to come back because of the Nimmo trade? I think it's more likely than a week ago, in my opinion, Chris.
You know what? I was going back and forth with this about what the impact of Brandon Nimmo's trade has on Pete Alonso in the mind of David Stearns. I also think I think it relies on two factors, right? It relies on, is David Stearns going to be serious about one of the above options that we talked about, from Bellinger all the way to Buxton, in terms of, adding that sort of payroll onto this roster, particularly Cody Bellinger. As I just mentioned, I think that he is the perfect free agent fit for David Stearns all around, in terms of the all around game and what he's looking for and what he said he's looking for. And I'm going to stick to this. I don't think Bellinger, especially if he takes a long-term deal, 5 to 6 years, is going to leave enough room for David Stearns to be enticed to go out there and give Pete Alonso his 6-year deal too. I could be wrong. I would love to be wrong. Pete Alonso and Cody Bellinger, now that Brandon Nimmo is gone, would be fantastic. I would sign up for that all day long. I just don't think that it's a possibility. So hopefully Steve Cohen is just like, you know what, we're going for it. If you need to, have the money to do it, go ahead and do it. But I think it more so depends on those names, and I think it depends on David Stearns, how tied to David Stearns, or how tied is David Stearns to Brett Beatty. I really do think that's what it is. Because third base could be another clear upgrade if you really wanted it to be. Now, I know Mets fans, right? David Stearns has the potential. Let me just say this right now. David Stearns has the potential to be a true villain of this Mets fan base when it's all said and done. We're talking about already trading Brandon Nimmo. We're talking about decisions whether to even extend a contract of what they want to Edwin Diaz and now Pete Alonso. We're talking about trading Jeff McNeil, and we're talking about potentially also trading Brett Beatty, per the recent report and article of Jeff Passan. Can you imagine a clean sweep? Maybe even 4 of these 5 names that are gone. But I think there's a case to be made with the way that David Stearns did talk about Brett Beatty recently, that maybe he does believe in Brett Beatty to be the third baseman of 2026 for the New York Mets. And if that's the case, I think that it would make the argument of pursuing, Pete Alonso to a long-term deal that much more desirable. But if not, if Brett Beatty's not going to be here, you need to upgrade somewhere, whether it's via trade or whether it's via free agency. One of the biggest names out there is Alex Bregman. And as I just mentioned with Cody Bellinger not being an option for a long-term deal alongside Pete Alonso, the same situation applies to Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso. I would love both at the same time on this team, in this lineup. I don't think it's going to happen. So there's a lot of deciding factors here, and I think that the Mets and David Stearns have to figure out internally how the infield configuration is going to go. You've got the middle of your infield already set with Semien and Lindor. That's going to be your staple for the next 3 years until the Semien contract runs out. The corners is now what you have to decide on. And Brett Beatty, I'll just say it, I've been saying it ever since last offseason. I still don't think his spot on this team is solidified. And there's a reason that where there is smoke, there is fire. Especially when a major reporter like Jeff Passan is reporting that Brett Beatty is still on the trade block, even going into this offseason. So I still, if I have to give you, which side of 50% am I leaning on of Pete Alonso returning, I do think he inevitably does return, because like you mentioned, David Stearns doesn't really concern himself with the views of this fan base and whether they think that he's a good, guy, first of all, and also a good, guy at his job. But I think that Pete Alonso, defense aside, if the conversations and the reports are true, that David Stearns did meet with Pete Alonso and Scott Boras and said, hey, listen, if you are willing to DH for this team at some point during this hypothetical long-term contract, then maybe we might be a little bit more in favor of giving it to you. If that is true, I can definitely see him coming back. And rightfully so. He is the perfect DH candidate in year 2, 3, 4 of that deal.
Well, Chris, let me ask you. what do you think is the sticking point with David Stearns, with Pete Alonso? Is it we need you to DH a little bit, or is it the 5 or 6 years? Because we haven't really heard that the Mets wouldn't go to 6 years if need be. We haven't really heard that. Like we're assuming right now that the Mets wouldn't give 6 years. They'll probably definitely go 4. Maybe they'll budge on 5 if they really need to. But what do you think the sticking point is? Is it the 5th or 6th year, or is it Pete Alonso only wants to play first base and that's not going to work for the Mets? If it has to be one, which one do you think Stearns is more leaning towards when it comes to Pete Alonso?
One more time. Sorry, I was reading some of the comments here. You said the 6th year, or what was the other option?
Or him being a somewhat of a DH from time to time. Which one do you think David Stearns would rather prefer, bringing him back on? If he's going to be a stickler to stay, I just want to play first base, or is it possibly the 5th or 6th year?
I think it's the first base, to be honest. I think it's the first base. I don't think that you can. I don't think that you can deny offensively what Pete Alonso has put up in his career. Yep. That is the case, and that is always going to be the case. I think that as Pete Alonso ages, his bat did kind of decline in 2024 for a little bit, and then it shot right back up in 2025. I have full confidence that he's going to produce similar numbers over the course of a 6-year contract. I just don't think that it's feasible for the New York Mets to just trot him out there at first base for the next 6 years. And so for me, I think in the mind of David Stearns, I don't think David Stearns is also naive to the fact that Pete Alonso is a premier power bat that any team would love to have in the middle of their lineup. But I just don't see David Stearns willing, given all of the horrendous advanced fielding metrics that Pete Alonso has been putting up. I think David Stearns is definitely privy to that. And he's like, you know what? I'll give you the 6th year. Because I do think the Mets would go 6 years, but only on the contingency of him willing to DH for the Mets. I'm not saying it's going to happen in 2026, right? That's dependent on what happens with Mark Vientos, presumably, because he could be a DH for the Mets as well as a handful of other guys. But I'm saying in 2027, 2028, and beyond is when Pete Alonso definitely needs to start being open to DHing. And from the initial reports that we've heard, it seems like he's definitely willing to do so, especially if that means he's going to get that 6th year from the Mets.
Yeah, I honestly think if Stearns thinks that he's going to lose Pete Alonso, he's going to go to Cohen and says, hey, we need to get this extra year if we want to keep Pete Alonso. I don't think Cohen's going to say no. So I honestly think it is the versatility part of Pete Alonso. I think if the Mets can have a backup or even a guy who can play first base and better defensively, I don't want Pete Alonso playing first base more often than not, to be quite honest with you. I'm not saying it's going to have to be this year, but if I have to see Pete Alonso throw another ball to a base, I might flip out. Like, we all hold out Brett when he throws the ball to any base, or even flip the ball for that matter. Either he's, pulling guys' hamstrings or trying to throw, hit guys in the face with a ball, or can't throw the ball to second base or home plate. That's worrisome, and don't think it's not. He's not a good defensive player. He's just not. It's okay to say that. He's a premier bat. We all get that. But Pete Alonso definitely needs to understand. And again, there could be a desperate team out there that might completely overpay, and it's an obnoxious contract, and you can see why the Mets wouldn't do it. A team like the Red Sox, who just, traded for Sonny Gray as well. So back-to-back off seasons of big trades for pitchers for the Red Sox. Good for them. The Mets won't do that. But you know what? Good for them. The Red Sox might be doing it too. They had a down season as well. They were expecting to do good things with Bregman. They're either going to get Bregman or Alonso. That's been reported by multiple of the Red Sox reporters. They're going to get one of them. It's just a matter of which one. So you got to be careful if you're the Mets. Same thing with Diaz. Same thing with Alonso. But I think if I have to choose between Diaz and or Alonso, which one has more likelihood of coming back? I think it's going to be Pete Alonso. And that might annoy me. I'd rather have Diaz. But again, it should be both. I don't think it should be an option, but it might look like that would be the case. So if you talked about Brett Beatty in this whole conversation with Pete Alonso, which team always has been after Brett Beatty for a couple of years now, even when he was in the farm system? The Miami Marlins. The Miami Marlins with Sandy Alcantara. I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. Get him here. right? You can make. I don't think you have to give up a ton for Sandy Alcantara. You're taking up the rest of that contract. Yeah, you might have to give a prospect, maybe a top 10 prospect, and maybe a lower level. I don't think you have to give up that much. You're taking on that money. I think you can give up Brett Beatty and maybe a top 20 prospect. I truly believe that. You got an everyday ready player in Brett Beatty, and you got a prospect that the Marlins love. Let him pick one. I think you can get Alcantara for that. He can clearly be top of your rotation with McLean, and you can still make a deal for a Peralta, or even a Skubal, or even a Ryan. You can get both. Those are your two big pitchers right there, along with Nolan McLean, and you can really mess around with the back end of your rotation, Chris. And I'm saying it right now. Sandy Alcantara is going to be a New York Met. I haven't brought it up in the last couple of hot stoves. His name really hasn't taken over the streams like it did during the trade deadline. Alcantara is going to be a New York Met. And as you said, and we all heard this reported multiple times by legitimate reporters, that the Mets are looking to get two top starters. They're looking for that. And you know what? I think the easiest way to do it is to make the trades. And can it be a combination of these two guys? I think it's a strong possibility, Chris. I think Sandy Alcantara is going to be a New York Met. Book it, guys. Book it.
I mean, he's a guy that we've been talking about on both of our channels for quite some time. And with the recent success, and I say success in quotations because the Marlins did objectively to their standards have a good year, especially in the tail end when they kind of made a little bit of a run at the wild card before it fizzled out. I was kind of skeptical going into this offseason about the status of and maybe their willingness to offload Alcantara because he does have another year after 2026. So that's 2 years of control that you have over Sandy for the Marlins have right now, and that you would be acquiring in a potential trade. But there's been a lot of interesting reports coming from Miami about guys that are eligible for extensions on the horizon that they've started talking extensions with and are not even close to the ballpark of what these players are asking for. One is Yuri Perez and one is Kyle Stowers. Now, Stowers is interesting because he's also a left fielder, by the way. And when you talk about a lot of these guys, especially a guy like Joe Ryan, right? And also Sandy, you could talk about packages of outfielders because we've already talked about Buxton and also a starting pitcher like Ryan and Sandy. I'm not saying that the Marlins are going to give up Stowers and Alcantara in a package deal because that would be a haul that they are asking for that I would be willing to listen in on if I was David Stearns in terms of what the asking price would be. And it would be a lot more than just Brett Beatty. But I think the more logical answer here is getting Sandy in a one for however many deal that the Marlins really want to get in terms of the prospect or MLB ready talent in return. I think that if you want to do a package deal for an outfielder like Buxton and Ryan or even Pablo Lopez, in terms of a starter in the Twins organization, it's easier to do because I think that the Twins, with the multitude of years that Buxton has left on his deal, would be more willing to part ways with a package deal like that to get the money off the books and trade a pitcher. I'm not really sure if a package deal is going to be the same thing for Sandy, but I can see Sandy being traded. If they hold on to Stowers, they already have what's his name at the top of their rotation? Oh man, I'm forgetting his name. He's a stud.
Cabrera.
Cabrera. They have Cabrera, Perez. I think they can afford to let go of Sandy and still be okay. But you talk about the extensions and the money and how far off they are with these guys like Perez and Stowers. That could be extra motivation to free up some money on the books and get rid of a guy like Alcantara and getting some of that payroll flexibility. So yeah, man, I think it's definitely possible. There's a lot of skepticism on Sandy and his future outlook because he did take a little bit of a decline, in the years following the injury. Even before the injury, when he went down with the Tommy John surgery, he was already on a little bit of a decline. But if you take a look at the splits in 2025, especially with the Mets playing the Marlins down the stretch a handful of times and seeing Sandy a handful of times, he was pitching lights out.
Yep.
And so I really do think that he could get back to form. You would have multiple years of control. And like we said, the conversation surrounding Brett Beatty, if they are still willing to listen in on Beatty and kind of, I guess, go for that resurgent year that he just had, I
Mhm.
don't even think the Mets hesitate,
Yeah,
especially given the need in the rotation to make that kind of trade happen. I'm not saying it's going to be one for one. I don't think it's as simple as one for one here, but that would be a deal where David Stearns could wheel and deal and still be okay because you can go out there and backfill third base if you really need to do so. Let alone the fact that I know that Jet Williams is not predominantly a third baseman, but they can kind of maybe see what happens there. But you also have Jacob Reimer coming up through the wings too.
there's another
I don't
one.
think he's recently in Double A, but that is a very highly regarded prospect that could be the future of third base for the New York Mets as well. That I know has a lot of Mets fans and prospect gurus excited in this organization. So I think that the Mets, like you said to begin with all these names, it's not about whether the Mets have. This is the most important thing to understand here, right? And this will fall directly on David Stearns. It's not about whether or not the Mets have the prospect capacity to make any of these deals
Sure,
happen. It's about one, is David Stearns willing to put the proper package together? And two, are these respective teams right here going to be listening in on offers for their top guys this offseason? And that's just what it
100%.
comes down to. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, 100%. And listen, give me at least one. If it's a top starter or one of these big name outfielders to make a big trade for, fine. But it shows that David Stearns is willing to do it. He's got the capital. He can get any one of these players. Chris, you made a great point. He can get any one of these players. Nothing stopping him. Nothing. I said this from the beginning. Nolan McLean is the only one untouchable. If anybody believes that anybody should not be, and yes, Carson Benz is kind of an iffy factor here, but it should. I'm sorry, if Detroit wants Carson Benz in a deal for Scooble, goodbye. Sorry, I know that might hurt a little bit, but you know what? What was the biggest problem with the Mets last year? Starting pitching, right? How many more times do we have to see starting pitching fall on their goddamn faces? All right, you get him. I'm not saying trade, Carson Ben for Peralta. All right, that's stupid. But a guy like Scooble, you get. Yes, he's a rental, but you know what? There might not be baseball in 2027 anyway. I'm not worried about 2027. I'm worried about 2026. Scooble is back-to-back Cy Young guy, best pitcher in baseball. You get him. That's it. It's just that simple. It really is, Chris. There's nothing else that needs to be done here. David Stearns has a package possibility for any of these players. Name them. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Again, Scooble, Ryan, those are the big guys. Go get them. Go get one of them. There's no reason why you can't. And you know what? Maybe you can finagle a deal for a Peralta as well, because I don't think it might cost him that much because he's on a 1 year deal. He's a rental as well. So, there's a lot of options here. There's more options this year, Chris, than there was last year. Remember it was Pete Alonso and like, what do we do if we don't sign him? There was nobody else. There wasn't a lot of options for the Mets last year. There are so many options this year where you might like one over the other, but it's not going to be bad because any of these guys, any of these names for the pitchers, any of these names for the outfielders, especially the pitcher, most of these guys were better than everybody we had in this rotation last year. So it's an upgrade. That's what you look at. You're looking to upgrade what you had last year. Every one of these guys are better than Mania. All right, McLean is still up in the air. It's a question mark. He looks good. But right now, these guys are proven talents. They're better than McLean until McLean proves otherwise. So go get one of these guys or even two of these guys, and I'm ready for it, Chris. So anything else before we end this up?
Yeah, no, I do apologize. I'm a little bit strapped on time tonight as well. I'd love to keep going. I think we can go for endless of hours talking about these topics, and we certainly will as the off season progresses because we're a couple of weeks away from the winter meetings when things generally heat up. But now we've seen an off season where a couple of major moves have already happened so far very early, and I'm very surprised about that. One coming from our very own New York Mets with the Brandon Nimmo trade, and also Dylan Cease move today. I think the only other thing that I wanted to say is, with Scooble, a lot of people talk about, why are you going to give up so much for a rental? we understand that, right? I think that there's, first of all, you're right with the CBA negotiations, et cetera, impacting that. But I think that there's no way, there's no chance, just like with the Lindor situation. I know it came down to the 19th hour and getting that extension done. There's no way they trade for one of these guys and give up that haul for a guy that is not coming already with like a figure of what the Mets can be in
They
the
know what it
ballpark
is.
of. Yeah, it's
You
just like
know,
it's Steve Cohen, man. He's not gonna
so,
let that happen. This is
right.
not a Cubs situation where they,
Yeah,
sent a pretty decent package for Kyle Tucker at 1 year of service, or like the Orioles who sent a package over to Corbin Burns or to the Brewers for Corbin Burns. This is not one of those situations. So if that's your concern, if that's your primary concern of not going full throttle after Skubal, if he is indeed available from the Tigers, that's my last concern. And
yeah,
that's all I'll say. So good stream. I appreciate it. Again, check out all the previous content. I released 2 videos on the channel today. If you haven't watched it, if you watched one or the other, go check the other one out. And we'll see you all at some point soon for the next hot stove. And hopefully get some more news in between then.
absolutely. And you know what? Listen, the Mets screwed up the Garrett Crochet situation, and you see how that happened, right? You can trade and sign. You could do that. You could do the same thing with Scooble. They know the number before they even trade this guy. They know what they're looking for. And if the Mets come close to that, he'll sign. He's not going to risk an injury and not be able to sign, especially with the CBA coming up. These players have a lot of question marks right now when it comes to the CBA. These guys are looking to sign. They're not going to wait because they all might not have contracts after the 2026 season and they wouldn't know what to do. Some of them are already rich, but you know what I mean. They're looking for that big payday, and it might not come because of the CBA fight that's going to come after this season. So, guys, everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Chris, have a great Thanksgiving. Everybody in the chat, have a happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate it or not. But listen, we got a whole off season 2 weeks before the winter meetings, and of course, with any breaking news, Chris did videos. Check out his videos. I did videos. And any breaking news, hopefully I'll be around to do lives. It's the holidays, so it's kind of hard sometimes. But with that said, guys, another Mets hot stove in the books. We do have a new Met in Simeon. Nimmo is gone. And let's see what else David Stearns has cooking for the rest of the offseason, guys. Have a great night. Let's go Mets, and have a good night. Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Good night, guys.
Go Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have a